recording. Okay. Can you guys all hear me? Is that going all right? Yes, you got me. Okay. Jordan says yes. Elise says yes. Okay. All right. Matt says yes. Awesome. Perfect. So here's my question. We're going to call it bro science. And in some ways, this is like the broiest of the bro science things today. Okay. So let me look at this. This will be a fun thing to try to ask. Let me blow up my Zoom window so I can see everybody. I'm not going to ask one of our students. Brady, why we've had this discussion. Brady, why is that your picture? Is that wine? Is that champagne? Are you like having toast in a wine flight? Like what's going on, bud? Brady, are you there? Have you had too much of the wine and therefore you can't even hear me? You're good? Okay. All right. So we're going to ask.
I'm good.
You're good? You sure? Yeah. Okay. I mean, you know, it is a Wednesday afternoon. So
drinking water.
Drinking water. Okay. All right. So I'm going to ask one of my non sort of exercise science undergrads so that I can see what kind of answer we get from everybody. So we'll just start. We'll start with Josiah. So Josiah, if I told you that we're gonna have you start resistance training, how much bigger do you think your muscles could get? Like how freaking jacked and like blown up do you think we could make you in, say, I don't know, 6 months or 9 months or a year? Like how big are you gonna get?
Probably not really that big. Only maybe a couple pounds.
Only maybe a couple of pounds.
Yeah.
Okay. So like we're not gonna ask anyone to share like how much muscle they think they have or how much they weigh or anything else. That's probably, well, it is sort of HIPAA protected information, but this isn't really a HIPAA kind of sharing situation. But do you guys think that's right, or that's enough? Like, do you think if we were to go talk to the bros that's what they would think? Like, dude, I'm gonna gain like 1 pound or like 2 pounds in that particular way? So Sarah, I know, not Skillet, but Sanders. Sarah, so I know like you were on the volleyball team. You probably have some interactions with other athletes and those things, maybe especially some of the guys. If we were to ask them, they're like, bro, like how much weight, how much muscle did I put on in this particular off season or something? Like, do you think they're gonna be like, oh, it was only 1 or 2 pounds? Do you think that's a reasonable answer?
I think that if they were to answer, they would definitely inflate that a little bit more. I think it would be higher.
Okay, so I mean, like, you know, do we think like they would say like, bro, I got like 20 pounds. I put on like 20 pounds of muscle. Does that seem like a reasonable thing?
That doesn't sound reasonable for an off season, no.
It doesn't sound reasonable. Okay. I mean, have you seen these guys on the football team? Some pretty big dudes, right? So, okay. Drew, what do you think? How much is a reasonable amount?
Well, I think it depends from where you're starting from. I used to be in gymnastics and I'm not anymore. And I know that I've lost a lot of muscle. Curiously, my weight has stayed the same. So I don't know. I think maybe 10 pounds if you're starting from nothing. But also I know people put on muscle differently. So
Okay. Drew's being very non-committal. How dare you be non-committal and try to be nuanced about things? Like, that is not what this is about, right? The bros are like, dude, like I got to get my protein. I got to make some gains. I got to read my muscle and fitness. I got to get on my testosterone and I'm just going to get super, super big. Okay. So like, I mean, all right. So we'll ask the thing a different way. How much stronger do you think you could get? Like if you could lift 100 pounds now, and then we do like 6 months of like weight training, like how much bigger do you think you could get? How much bigger, God, how much stronger do you think you could be at the end of all of that? Could you lift 200 pounds?
Yeah.
Matt says yes. You think so?
If we're talking like
I think it depends on the muscle group you're testing. If you're talking biceps, no way. But
I mean,
like leg,
if you can lift 100 pounds with your biceps, then we've already broed out to the max. If you're
yeah.
curling the hundreds, then like that's the whole deal, man. Like we are at peak sort of bro. Okay. So it might sort of depend. Okay.
But if you're talking deadlift, I think easily you could go from 100 to 200 or the squat.
Okay. Okay. So that's like 100% gain in strength. Josiah's talking about like we're gonna gain like 2 pounds of muscle, and y'all are like, no, yeah, but also we could get 100% stronger. Do those things seem incongruent to you guys? Maybe a little bit. Nobody knows. All right. So I'll quit being a pain in the butt about all of this. So the thing that's probably right, like the most bro-ish of all things, and you guys were not nearly bro-ish enough. You're way too smart and nuanced as grad students, and we've done this like twice, and so you know like what the answers probably need to be. Are you can't actually get that big, right? You're really not going to be able to get that big. Now, the caveat to all of this is steroids, all bets are off. Okay, all bets are off. Nothing weird. We'd have no clue. You take steroids and sit on the couch and eat Cheetos, and you're going to get big. You take steroids and you go and you do resistance training properly, and we're not sure. Like you blow all genetic limits sort of out of the water. Okay, so when we see some of these kinds of things, there's some really, and I don't think it's on Netflix anymore, but there's a documentary if anybody cares about these things about Arnold doing sort of weightlifting. It's very famous, and I have forgotten the name of it, and I apologize for all of that, but they talk about all the steroids that they did and all the other sort of lifestyle things that were going on. It's pretty wild. But I'm sorry to say, guys, but that no matter what any of us do, we probably aren't going to look like Arnold unless we take steroids, right? Probably not going to look quite in that particular place. So here's some real data, despite what the bros might think. This is from a very, very large study. This was published in, I think, in the mid 2000s, and was done in conjunction by Yale, the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, Boston College, and there was one of those other, there's like 8,000 universities in Boston. It was not MIT, but there was a bunch, and it was not Harvard, but there was another one that was up there. And so they tested almost 600 people, approximately 300 men and approximately 300 women. And this is a histogram of the sort of percent changes that they saw across their sample. They did 12 weeks of resistance training. This is cross-sectional area change, which we'll talk a little bit about today. This is measured with magnetic resonance imaging, so MRI, so it's super, super, super accurate. It's just in the bicep. And what you will note is, and we've got what I believe it's women that are in black and men that are in the white. But if you look at this, that we kind of have this very nice sort of normal distribution of people centering somewhere kind of right around between, about 18% or thereabouts, okay? And then we've got some people that worked out and they actually lost muscle, real weird. And then these people that we've got these very few kind of outline people that are way up here at like 50% or thereabouts, okay? So if you take a 150-pound person who is 15% body fat, and you worked out every single muscle in their body, and you made every muscle in their body 15% bigger, they would gain 8 pounds, okay? 8 pounds. So Josiah, you weren't that far off in the midst of all of those things, but the people are like, bro, I put on 30 pounds and it's all freaking muscle and all of these things. That's just, people may put on 30 pounds, but I assure you it's not all muscle. And they may be on some steroids or something. The one caveat to that is if you take people, both men and women that are kind of in their late teens or even sometimes in their early 20s, like all sort of bets are off again, because if you have people that are kind of late maturers, in that way. Then and you see this more in men than in women, because ladies, y'all tend to go through puberty a little bit earlier. We won't ask the question, right? My wife has been the height that she was since she was like 12, and has not gotten like any taller. And so, but you tend to see, like, we were looking at some of the guys that are on the football team or the basketball team or something that haven't really worked out super duper well when they were in high school and haven't had maybe the kind of nutrition options that are available, then they may still, but that's sort of growth and things that are going on. It's not exactly kind of responses to training. So anyway, so I tell all of you guys this to be like, look, if you want to be bodybuilders or fitness models or whatever, like, we can make your muscles bigger, but the vast majority of what's going to have to happen is you're going to have to probably lose weight to be very, very lean. It's not going to be, it's just, none of you guys are going to look like Arnold, or I don't know what the female equivalent of Arnold would be, if you were striving for that particular thing, in that way. So there's some real data. You want to make a bro mad, tell them that all the protein that they take is really dumb and they don't need to do it. Sarah, we won't talk about what y'all get from a nutrition standpoint, but it's probably more than you need. If y'all are doing things, if they're feeding you too much stuff. As long as you're not a vegetarian, you guys probably get enough. Hold on, my wife is upstairs and somebody is ringing our doorbell. I'm gonna pause. Okay, folks, I apologize. This has become sort of a nightmarish sort of thing. I have we have a roofer guy who is here wanting to look at stuff. So, and my daughter is now awake. So, so I'm gonna run upstairs real fast. We'll do just a few minutes of this, and we'll call it for today. And so I apologize that this has been today. Has just kind of been a kind of a lost cause. Okay. Okay. Brady, what am I looking at there? Are you playing video games? What is that?
No, it's not just a tapestry.
Okay, a tapestry.
Yeah,
Brady's classy. He has a tapestry. So,
I mean, yeah.
okay, I like it. I like it. All right. So, as I said, guys, I really apologize. This today has just been it's been one of those days. My daughter's been sick for a week, and we thought she's going back to daycare today, and as it turns out, she is not. Okay, so the main thrust of what I wanted us to talk about today was to begin talking about how we control force production in muscles. Okay, so why is Drew as strong as Drew is, right? And why might Brady be different? Okay. Or what are the things that would make someone that is tall, like Sarah, different from how her muscles are going to function than someone like me that is shorter? Okay. And so the way that this is kind of laid out is, and we'll walk our way through some of this, but probably not all of it today, is there's kind of 5 major things. Okay. Now there are there's more than this, but really these are kind of the 5 big things. And what I want you all to appreciate is that all of these things are acting together simultaneously. Okay. Whenever you go to do a movement, to allow you to generate whatever force it is that you're able to generate while you're doing that particular movement. Okay. So again, many of the things that we know about each one of these things, we know them from sort of reductionist model research that, well, if we hold everything constant except for this, then this is how force production will change. Okay. And that's a good way of looking at these things, but the real practice of this, when you go to do something, when you go to run or jump or walk or anything that you're doing, is all of these things acting in concert together. Okay. So the first place to start is that muscles are different. Okay. You've got, 500 some muscles or 600 some muscles in your body. But they don't all look the same, right? So like, even if you just were to look at, just look at your arm or something. All right. So like your bicep looks very different than your tricep does. Right. And you've got sort of multiple heads of, what is it? The biceps brachii that exist here. Have we talked about that? I've never had a class in anatomy. Have we talked about that like as a group, or was I telling my undergrads that I've never had a class in anatomy? No, does that astound you guys? Anybody? Probably not my biomedical engineers, maybe not, but my exercise phys people, when I tell you guys, you don't have to have anatomy, it's okay. I've taught anatomy and physiology, never had anatomy. So I'm like, I think this is a biceps brachii. I don't know. Somebody will have to correct me on all of that. Is that right, Brady? That's what that is? Okay. I get a thumbs up from Brady. So anyway, some muscles are short and thick, some are long and skinny, some are, as you guys will see, kind of a fan-like looking deal where they're kind of wide but thin. They all come in different shapes and sizes. And much like the way sort of the anatomy and physiology of the nervous system and the physiology of muscle contractions all go, structure imparts function. Okay. So depending upon the job or the primary job of an individual muscle, then it may have a very different structure or a different shape or something else. Okay. So muscles that are primarily sort of going to exist to generate lots of force, like your quads or your glutes, are going to be relatively shorter but thicker. We'll talk about how having a bigger cross section is going to get us more force. Okay. Whereas muscles that are going to primarily exist for going fast, maybe kind of more long and slender, like your hamstrings or the little muscles that control your eyelids or something. Okay. So in this way, again, shape and things are going to be really, really, really vital for function. Okay. So in a very general sense, and again, we don't really have time to talk our way through all of this, but if you make a muscle longer, okay, if you add sarcomeres or sort of myofibrils that are going to go in series, one after another, and lengthen out a muscle, that tends to increase the velocity at which that muscle can contract. Whereas if you add cross sections, so you add sarcomeres in parallel with each other, so they're kind of all running the same direction, that's going to increase the cross section, and that's going to tend to increase the total ability of that muscle to generate force. Okay. So first and foremost, people will argue whether or not this is the single most important thing that makes muscles sort of stronger or weaker or whatnot. But kind of the easiest place to start, if I ask everyone to look around at everybody else in class, if we were in person, and say, pick out the person in class that you think is the strongest, the thing most of you would immediately gravitate towards is, I'm looking for the person that seems to have the largest cross section of their muscles. Okay. So what you guys see here is this is a cross section of a left thigh. Okay. It's my left thigh from when I was doing my PhD. And this is an MRI image taken right out about the middle of your thigh. So with this muscle you see out here is the vastus lateralis. Okay. This is the rectus femoris. This is the vastus medialis. And then here's the intermedius. The light area here is bone marrow. This is where the minerals in your femur are going to be here. We got some hamstrings down there. There's the femoral artery, and then you've got subcutaneous fat all the way around. Okay. So this is my leg. It is in fact a piece of steak, right? That's all. When you eat steak, you're just eating cow muscle. That's what you're doing. So think about that the next time you have steak. We're having steak fajitas tonight. They're already marinating. So that's what I've been thinking about today is, oh God, I'm eating cow muscle. But if we were to look, so as the cross section gets bigger, and all I've done is just blown up my leg here, but as the cross section gets bigger, in a very general sense, that should mean we have more muscle, more actin and myosin, and a greater ability to have cross bridges that can form, and therefore more force. Okay. So if you just kind of look around, that's a pretty safe assumption. People that are bigger than other people are probably going to have more muscle and probably going to have a reasonable chance to be stronger. But things are not that simple. Okay. It's not that simple. That's not always going to be the case. Many of you probably know someone, work out with someone, have a friend, have ever been in a fight with someone. I don't know what you guys do. Okay. But you think, I have bigger muscles than this person, and yet they are stronger than I am. Okay. And so we'll get into some of the reasons as to kind of why that might in fact be the case. Okay. So as we start sort of in the complexities that are going to go into muscle size, the first thing that I want you guys to understand is that not all cross sections are created equal. They're not all the same. Okay. So there's this concept of what's called loosely muscle architecture. And so architecture is the arrangement of fibers relative to the axis of pull or relative to the axis of force generation. Okay. And so architecture is going to rely on something called pennation. And so Pennation is just the angle formed by these muscle fibers when they come in and connect to the tendon on which they're going to pull to cause movement. Okay. So we have different kinds of muscles. This muscle here, where the fibers are basically running exactly parallel to the tendon. So they have no pennation. Those are called fusiform muscles. You have, this is a hamstring muscle. We have a unipinnate muscle where you've got the tendon and all of the fibers are coming in from one side of the tendon. Okay. Here you have a bipinnate muscle like the rectus femoris, where you've got the tendon and the fibers are going to all come in from both sides. Okay. And then you have this thing like the deltoid, which is weird and is a multi-pinnate, or you've got, if you think about your pec muscles, you've got these kind of triangular things where there's going to be differences in the pennation within all of the different fibers. So the fibers that are kind of on the periphery are going to come in at a steeper angle than some of the ones in the middle are pulling very, very kind of in parallel. And so it can get relatively complicated. Okay. And so one of the ways that we try to deal with all of this is if we know pennation angle, and I'll tell you guys how we can measure this in a couple of slides, but if we know the pennation angle and we know the area that the muscle covers, we can calculate something called physiological cross-sectional area. And I'll show you guys kind of how all of that works, okay? So normal cross-section, where you just take a muscle, like you take my bicep and you just cut it right here and you look at the cross section. In my bicep, that's not that bad because they're all pulling pretty parallel. Okay, but if you look at a lot of other muscles that have a high level of pennation, the cross section that we cut like this, just a pure anatomical cross section, in no way, shape, or form captures the sort of ability of those fibers to be able to pull. Okay, and the area of fibers that are available and how we account for pennation. So the idea of physiological cross-sectional area tries to account for all of that, okay? So when we calculate physiological cross-sectional area, what we're supposed to do is we take the mass of our muscle, we multiply it by the cosine of the pennation angle, because how many of you guys have had physics and know about vectors? Our biomedical engineers, y'all know about vectors? Y'all want to do some vector resolution for us? So Sarah says no. Okay. So I assure you, we don't want to either. But the idea is that if I've got a tendon or something like this, and I have a muscle that comes in and attaches at an angle, and that muscle pulls in this direction, okay, by vector resolution, not all of the force being applied by this muscle on the tendon is going to, it's trying to pull it like this. So it has both a horizontal and a vertical component to it. Yet the tendon can only get pulled in a vertical direction. So not all of the force generated from the muscle is going to be applied on the tendon to pull the tendon in the direction that we want to go. So sometimes having pennation, we are losing, right? We're losing force from that muscle by having the pennation. So we know the cosine of pennation angle will tell us how to resolve in some ways that vector of how much of our force is actually getting applied. We then divide that by the density of the muscle multiplied by the fiber length, okay? Well, in you guys, I don't know about y'all, but I really can't measure your fiber length. That kind of becomes ridiculous. Your muscle density is pretty much the same across everybody. And it's hard for us to kind of cut out your muscle and weigh it. And so basically the way that we resolve this in people is we say, look, physiological cross-sectional area is roughly going to equate to your anatomical cross-section, which is what you would see here, multiplied by the cosine of your pennation. And we can do a little bit better. This is from a paper that we published before my dissertation, where we actually took MRI images along the length of the of your thigh, and we started all the way up here, like in where you could see a lot of hip flexors, but at the head of the femur, and all the way down sort of this way. And you take these individual slices, and it's a MRI image, and so you can add up all of these. You can interpolate in the space in between, add everything up. You can get a rough volume. If you know this length, you can get a volume and you can multiply that volume by the cosine of the angle. And you can get a rough approximation of how much muscle you have. That's a shit ton of work, I'm not going to lie, just to get an estimation that is slightly better. Okay, so what we tend to do now, if you really care about all of this, and so if you want to do this, what you want to do is you want to talk to Skillet and you want to go down to their lab and you want to borrow their ultrasound machine. And what you see here, guys, is this is a Doppler ultrasound image of a vastus lateralis muscle. And so what you see here, here's the outer layer, the outer skin. Here's some what they're calling the deep aponeurosis. This is just connective tissue. And what you will note is these things that look bright that are running this direction, they're not muscle fibers. Those are actual muscle fascicles, okay? Those are fascicles that are running the length of everything here. And so we can do this though, we can measure the angle here of how these fascicles are connecting relative to the deep aponeurosis. We can calculate this angle and that will give us our pennation angle. So we can do this for relatively any mostly superficial muscle in your body, okay? And so we can get, by measuring from here down, we can get a thickness measure or something that's going to approximate an anatomical cross-section. But to be honest, the physiological cross-section is this angle, but it's got to be multiplied by all the way out, this whole distance that runs like this, okay? So we can do this in our labs. It's very, very commonly done now. And so what I want you all to appreciate with this is what we're going to call tendon force is going to be equal to the force. So this is the force that's actually pulling on the tendon that gets applied to the bone to cause movement. People call that tendon force, okay? So whenever you're lifting weights, what you're actually doing, if I'm curling a 10-pound weight, what I'm actually doing is I'm producing slightly more than 10 pounds of tendon force or tendon torque to allow myself to lift that weight. So tendon force is equal to the force exerted by the individual muscle fibers, the muscle fascicles, multiplied by the cosine of their pennation. So if we look at all of this, okay, we can calculate a pennation angle. Here you can see a fusiform muscle like the sartorius, or in some ways like the bicep, where all of the fibers run exactly parallel to the tendon. In this instance, tendon force and fiber force are exactly equal because the pennation angle is 0, right? There is no pennation, so it's the cosine is going to be 1. The cosine of 0 is 1, and so tendon force and fiber force are exactly going to be equal, or fiber force exactly equals tendon force. If you have a unipennate muscle, what you will note here is that, say they're coming in at about a 30-degree angle, we're losing 13% of the force generated by these fibers, okay, to apply force to the tendon. But look at this. This is the same anatomical cross-section here, here, and here. But by coming in at an angle, what I've actually done when I measure perpendicular to the line of pull, my green line gets longer than it is here. So I actually have a larger cross-section because I can pack more fibers in here. And so this accounts by being unipennate, I can put more fibers in than I can by being fusiform. And so doing this compensates. I can get more than a 13% increase in the number of fibers that I have. And so I actually end up with this unipennate muscle being able to generate more force than a fusiform muscle, even though I'm losing 13% of that force because of pennation. Guys, does that make sense? Do you all see how that might work? Okay. And if you get to a multi-pennate muscle, like a lot of the quadriceps muscles, they're coming in from both directions. So I'm losing, let's say the same 30-degree angle, I'm losing 13% on both sides, but I've basically doubled my cross-sectional area, right? So I have an anatomical section, but by being multi-pennate, I actually have twice the physiological cross-sectional area. So I can pack all of these additional fibers in. Even though I'm losing force, I have double the actual cross-section. And so this is one of the advantages of having pennate or multi-pennate muscles. is that having pennation, even though when we do all the vectors, they're a little bit inefficient in transmitting force to the tendon, they let us put so many more fibers into a given area and increase our physiological cross-section so much that it compensates for that loss, and we actually end up with an ability to have even more force. Okay, so that's one of the advantages in some ways of having pennation. Okay. All right, questions about, you guys have questions about all of that? No? Skillet, you want to go like carry your computer around and show them the ultrasound?
You want me to show the ultrasound?
You don't have to show them the ultrasound. It's okay.
Okay.
We'll save that for another day. Maybe we'll take a field trip when we talk about doing flow media dilation or something when we want to see, when we start talking about the ability of arterioles and arteries to dilate and things. But it can be done. Actually, theirs is really nice. Theirs is a really fancy one. We have two other ones in the department that are kind of crappy. They were both in Dr. Mike's lab, and I have commandeered one. And so we could probably measure pennation with it. I would not want to do much of anything else, but we could probably get an estimate of those things. So if that's a thing that you guys end up caring about, because there are actually some changes in pennation when you do resistance training. As your muscles get bigger, the pennation angle is going to shift. And I'm trying to remember in what direction. I feel like it shifts in a direction to where you become less inefficient. But we'll get to that when we talk about resistance training. Off the top of my head, I can't remember, but that's kind of what happens with those things, okay? So that's the idea of a physiological cross-section versus an anatomical cross-section. And this could be a reason where you see people that have roughly the same size muscles, that one person is stronger than somebody else because the way that their pennation angles are going to come in, they may actually be able to pack more fibers and things in and have better transfer of force. Okay. Okay, so this is just showing the physiological cross-section, that same kind of thing. All right, so it's almost 4. I don't want to get into motor unit recruitment and motor unit activation if I can't kind of finish the whole thing. I don't want to start on all of that. So we're just going to kind of punt. We're going to punt the rest of today. And I will,